And so this is the point we're going to talk about how to actually start to decide what's next, start to do things like, well, how should you name your company? How should you start to make decisions about what to do next? And how do we start moving towards an MVP? Ultimately, there is no timeline for customer discovery. There's kind of never-ending customer discovery. My last company, Zarly, we literally were a company that had 60 employees, and we had numbers of people, millions of users on the platform. We were still doing customer discovery every Friday from 2 to 4, where we'd bring in people and actually talk to them about our product. So customer discovery doesn't start and end. It's simply a process that you continue to go through. So again, I can't say that you're necessarily ready or not ready for the stage you're at. It's a little bit like you'll just know once you feel like you have enough and you're ready to move to the next step. As you're thinking about actually turning your kind of problem statement into the product, this is the right point to be starting to think about this. So this is the tools we'll talk about today. So there is one big caveat I talk about today. So we're going to talk about data-driven decision making, which is, again, using information from outside resources to help you make decisions. Now, to be totally clear and candid, surveying people is not the same as customer discovery. Customer discovery involves sitting down in front of someone and asking them questions face to face. You want to read their body language. You want to understand when they lean in. You want to ask open and not specific questions oftentimes. So when you're at the point where you're actually trying to do surveying, you've already talked to a number of customers and have some good insights. So don't just feel like you have to jump into surveying right away. The key here thing is actually to make sure that you get out of the building and are doing it. So I'm going to give a warning sign here, a little bit of a personal experience. So about a year ago, I decided it would be interesting to see if there was a business opportunity around creating a home services concierge. So the thought was, people who own homes need things like lawn care, house cleaning, chimney cleaning, the roof to be taken care of. All of these things are a real pain in the ass. So the idea was, could we wind up coming up with a concierge who could provide all of those services in one place? I thought, it's kind of a pretty good idea, right? Like, I'm going to IPO this thing. So I said, the first step, let's do a little bit of validation. So I put out a survey on Facebook of some friends of mine and saw what they thought. 25 participants took my short little survey, and the answer was an overwhelmingly hell yes. Like, that's amazing. I own a home, I would love to do that thing. Great. I almost started saying, like, let's go build something, but I stopped myself and said, you know, talking about this customer discovery thing, I should probably go do that. So the following week, I set up 16 interviews with the people that were my target audience, which was actually women aged 28 to 45. So I thought that women who own a home and are likely the one making buying decisions about home services would be a great set of people. So I brought up this idea about a home services concierge, and I said, how great would it be if I had someone great who was going to find all the great people to come into your house? The answer was, there's no way I would ever use a product like that. Absolutely not. And I thought, like, what is going on there? I literally had surveyed all these people, and it was 24 out of 25 people said yes. But then I went and talked to people, and they said, not really. The reason I found out is I wasn't asking the right questions or open questions. The nice part when I asked the survey was like, hey, would you like it to make it easier on you and all this kind of stuff? And everyone, of course, said yes. But when I had a conversation, the real problem was these women didn't want strangers in their house. They wanted to know these people quite well. They wanted to have control over who was coming into their house. So ultimately understand that surveying is a different way to understand rather than it is just to do customer discovery. So does that make sense a little bit? Just a helpful exercise? Like, again, don't think that because you you survey 25 friends on Facebook that you should go out and build dog book. Ultimately understand you need to talk to customers because they'll tell you things that you won't pick up in survey. So this is the legendary story, if all of you know about Henry Ford, who invented the Model T. If Henry Ford would have done a focus group and asked people what they wanted, they would have said a 12-legged horse. They wanted a horse that would run faster. And ultimately the same legend has been talked about Steve Jobs. It's not actually that people wouldn't have told them that they wanted the iPhone. They would have said they wanted a flip phone that flipped bigger or something different. Ultimately, it's about taking the information you hear and turning it into your results. So again, remember, you're not doing focus groups. You're trying to do customer discovery and learn. So what we're talking about today, these surveys, you've already gone past this point. So the key in all of this is getting out of the building and actually searching for the business model. So let's actually talk a little bit about the scientific method, which is what we're going to be using today a little bit. And this is the point, kind of all this data-driven decision-making is built on this concept of the scientific method. Oxford's dictionary describes it as a method or procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century. And kind of the points you raise, systematic observation, measurement, and experimentation in the formulation and testing of hypotheses. So it sounds a lot like what you hear about Lean Startup, and that's because Lean Startup essentially is the scientific method, but for startups. So I know that's the great big reveal. Everyone thinks the Lean Startup is magic. It's all stolen from the scientific method. So understand that we're actually just applying scientific principles to decision making. And so we'll talk a little bit about how you deploy it. So there's actually kind of really these key 5 parts to actually the scientific method, if you break this down. There's the formulation of a general question, hypothesis, prediction, testing, and analysis. And so what does that mean? It sounds great in theory, but let's see how it's deployed. So first off, to use the scientific method as it is in the discovery of DNA. For a long time, we didn't know what DNA looked like. We knew that it was something called DNA, but we didn't know its structure. So there's actually a process, a scientific process, that was reviewed through the scientific method to determine it. I'm not going to go through all of it, but in some ways you'll see they started out with an investigation. So we talked about before, you investigate the space a little bit, understand it, and they formulated a hypothesis that it was in the shape of a double helix. The next start is they actually said they predicted kind of what this would look like. They thought it would have, if it had the structure, what would happen. They ran a test to see if it was like, and at the end of the day, they found out they were right. So that works great in science. But the question I often get is, so yeah, it works great if you're trying to do hard sciences or do stuff in a laboratory, but does this really work in startups? And the answer is absolutely. All of these same principles apply directly in your startup. And that's where the Lean Startup movement came from. It was essentially taking all of these pieces here. The word hypothesis is used throughout Steve Blank and Eric Ries's work. It's not an accident it's used there. It's actually because they use the same principles. So when you're starting to think about this stuff, spend a little bit of time. The Wikipedia page on scientific method, if you actually replace all of the words like science and like DNA and like laboratories, the things that you're thinking about in your startup, you'll find that it relates almost identically. So how can you make your company a scientific startup? And we're going to actually talk through a couple specific examples today of showing how this would work in your companies. And so we'll actually work through an example, but just a few of them. And one we'll talk about today is how to name your company using the scientific method. So we're actually going to use a process, and I'll show you a real example about how we really named a company using the scientific method. How to pick your logo without actually asking your sister-in-law who might have been an art student once in college to design a logo or stealing something off the internet. We can actually use this process, but there's a whole bunch of them. People use the scientific method to price their product. They use it to which font they should use. They use it the color of their website. Again, it's a process. It's just a way to make decisions not based on your gut, but based on data.